Well, here I am again. I'm going to start a new quilt. I have a piece of fabric here that is quite pastel and has a lot of overall design. But I really like the butterfly motif on it, and I'm going to try something with fussy cutting. Fussy cutting requires good arithmetic because you have to know what you're going to put beside it before you cut something in a particular size. So I measured the distance from the top of the butterfly, 3 butterflies, to the bottom of the 3 butterflies. And I've been working on my maths and I've come up with a bit of a solution. Now, the next thing is there's another set of butterflies on this piece of fabric, which are a horizontal configuration. And I thought I'd try to also put those into this quilt. So I have to measure from one side to the other side and top to bottom so I can get a square or a block to put beside it that will create a nice pattern. So I'm trying to keep 3 butterflies together and not cut them into 3 different pieces of like 4.5-inch blocks. So I've got a block that I'm starting to work on. Now, quite often when fussy cutting, you're cutting out something that's just that size, and then you've got a big hole in the middle of your fabric. But the nice thing about this piece of fabric is that there's enough variety on the side that I will be able to use some of that in other blocks on the quilt I'm going to make. So you see, the first thing I did was cut out one of the 3 vertical butterflies, and I cut right to the side, and I have started making something over here which I think might work. So what I did was measure the 3 butterflies from top to bottom, and then I added a small border around the outside to give it definition and also to make it a size that would accommodate a 4.5-inch square, 2 of them side by side sewn together there. And also up alongside, it would take 1, 2, 3 to the top of this. So 3 this way, 2 that way, and then I'd fill in the corners. So you see, I did use the fabric that I cut away from the side of the butterfly to make a block and another one. And I can use all sorts of fabrics that are going to complement the butterfly motif. Now, remember once before I mentioned that down alongside on the selvages are all the colors that are used in this print, and there's all sorts of colors in this print that can be used to make 4.5-inch blocks to make a pattern. But my quilt is going to be a small quilt, I think, and it's going to just feature the butterflies and blocks of coordinating colors, squares of coordinated colors. And I've got lots and lots of small pieces of fabric that I'm trying to use, and I normally don't use pastels. So this is going to be a challenge for me to figure out how to place the pastel colors so it just doesn't look like it's all washed out. But that's my next quilt I'm going to work on. And there'll be lots of pieces left over in between. And I love stuff that has writing on it. So I think I'll make use of all of this eventually. But for now, I'm just going to cut out the butterfly motifs in the sizes that I want. That one, and all the rest on this piece of fabric. I'll use them, and then I'll figure out the plan for the finished quilt. But fussy cutting can be fun, and you should give it a try. So here's my first finished quilt made from the butterfly components from the 1.3 meters of fabric that I had. And it's a nice 40 by 60 baby quilt. And so now I'm just showing you what the fabric looked like at the beginning. after I cut out the butterfly pieces, I had to decide what to do with the rest of the fabric. I was able to lay it out on my desktop and cut a lot of 5.5-inch squares. And most of those squares, I was able to line them up and actually do fussy cutting with the 5.5-inch squares that I cut. And I got 12 stacks of 4 5.5-inch squares. So with each of those stacks, you can see them there on the right hand side. I was able to use the stack of 4 fussy cut pieces to make the square component around the block. There are 4 pieces that are fussy cut from the original fabric, and then the 4 corner blocks are using complementary fabrics from my stash of scrappy bits. And I used 1 solid color for the background. So when I finish this quilt from the leftovers after the butterflies were cut out, there will be 12 blocks that look like this, only the fabric choices will be different. They'll be quite scrappy looking, and it will make a regular bed size quilt with a border around the outside. So those blocks each measure 5.5 inches when they're done. And they're all fussy cut as well, and they look really quite nice together. So I'm going to show you how I do the corners. The squares. I usually draw a line on the diagonal, stitch on the line, and then trim with the rotary cutter or cut it off with the scissors, and this part is discarded. These are 3.5-inch squares, so this can actually be used rather than wasting it. So if you take a few extra minutes, you can do a double line of stitching. One at the line that is recommended, that is required by the pattern, and then inside the part that's going to be discarded in the first place, if you sewed another row of stitching, a half an inch away because you want to have your 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then stitch both of those, and then you have that stitched, and when you trim in between the two of them, you will have small 2.5-inch, half-inch triangles, squares. And after doing a whole big quilt, you're going to have a whole pile of those things that you can, at your leisure, just trim to 2.5 inches and make them into pinwheels or broken dishes, or use them for row quilts. And that way you reduce the amount of waste fabric. You paid for it, make use of it. And that's my tip for today. So once you've finished with the quilt and the second quilt, and you have leftovers, all I had left over from my 1.3 meters of fabric were these small bunch of squares that I can put into my square bin. But I will likely make a row quilt using the leftover 1/4 inch or 2.5-inch squares. And that, folks, is all the garbage leftover bits that I had from 1.3 meters of fabric. And I will have the better part of 3 quilts with scraps and 1.3 meters. That's it.